Hola, me llamo Armando Porras y soy hijo de padres de México.
Bom dia, meu nome é Márcio e sou do Brasil.
Assalamu alaikum, men Mahfizaman, men Uzbekistan'danman.
Apa kabar? Saya Josephine dari Brunei.
And I'm Will, and I'm from Texas. Less exciting, I know. So just within our group, that's 5 different languages. But even more than that, it's 5 different cultures, 5 different backgrounds, 5 different sets of preferences, 5 different sets of experiences that have shaped us all into who we are today. Looking into the broader rice business community, we have classmates from India, China, Nigeria, all over the world. And our generation is uniquely privileged to have the chance to interact with all these people from all these different cultures and get to know them, get to learn from them, whether it's in business or personal. Business side, whether you go into consulting, banking, entrepreneurship, you're going to have interaction with either a client, a customer, a vendor in these countries. And it's important to understand their backgrounds and how they prefer to communicate to maximize your profitability. On the personal side as well, it's easier than ever to travel halfway across the world for a weekend and really immerse yourself in a different culture. So it's important to understand the best way to learn and to interact with people from those cultures. So we're going to talk a little more about the components of culture and what it means when we say culture, and some tips for interacting with people from different cultures. So with that, I'll pass it to Josephine to talk a little more about the components of culture.
Thank you, Will. So to understand why intercultural communication is so complex, it is very important to understand what culture is. So culture, people usually assume it's about race, ethnicity, and nationality, but it actually dives deeper into that. Culture is also about gender identity, age, and personal attributes. Although people who identify in the same groups have common patterns, it is good to know that each individual is different and unique. So although our goal today is to identify the common patterns that are universal, we need to keep in mind that each individual is unique. Understanding the typical customs and norms of the people that you're trying to identify with is also essential in business communication. So do some research beforehand to see what you should and shouldn't do so that you can avoid uncomfortable situations. A common business practice in Japan is to give and receive business cards with both hands. It's a very simple gesture, but it shows that you value the relationship. Now, other norms are a little bit less obvious, such as in Western cultures, people tend to be more assertive when sharing their ideas, while in Asian cultures, people tend to be more passive while sharing their ideas. So in cross-cultural business communication, we advise to take a more neutral tone and also be considerate of the inputs of others, whether if it's something that you're accustomed to or not. Because at the end of the day, if all else fails, just remember that people are more forgiving when they can see that you're making the effort. So I'm going to pass it on to Mafiza now, who will touch on the other topics of cross-cultural business communication.
Thank you. So the next thing which I'm going to talk about is cultural adaptivity versus cultural specific. So what does it mean for cross-cultural communication? While you're interacting with a new culture, try to more deeply look how people in that new culture live, how they negotiate with each other, how they interact, how they make deals or business, rather than learning their traditions, events, or etc. things. The reason for that is you are not only will celebrate their holidays or traditions or events, but you will simply deal with them. You will negotiate with them, or you will interact with them. The most important thing is language. Language is the key factor in interacting with other peoples. Knowing different languages is a competitive power to make a strong relationship with the new people's new culture. But it will break your invisible bridge towards your new culture. So learning of new cultural language shows not only your respect to the new culture, but it will make a stronger ties or bonds with your new partners. But one should keep in mind that not all the cultures are very happy to learn their language. From my own experience, I can say that Korean people are not happy to learn their language because they will keep their language as a kind of confidentiality or to keep their privacy while they interact with each other. And last thing that I want to mention is usage of translator services. Try to minimize using of their services. But if it's not possible, if you are using them, talk to your partner, not the translator. So about cultural adaptivity, you will be more enlightened by Armando. Thank you.
When we think of communication, it's very common for us to think of the words first. But we need to understand that words convey different power in different cultures. In high context cultures, it goes beyond the words. It's the social environment that surrounds that conversation. In low context cultures, such as the United States, Germany, Sweden, and a lot of other Scandinavian countries, the power's in the contract. The final point of the conversation is to get that contract, and that's where the power lies, the words of that. Whereas with a high context culture, it's very important to understand the social environment. What are the relationships that are being built? For example, in social and high context cultures, like most Latin American countries, most Asian countries, gifts are a very important part, or can be an important part, because you're establishing those relationships. So for example, I would give a gift, like rice, to Mafisa as part of our contract, when you wouldn't normally think that that would add power to it. But in these high context cultures, there's a lot of value, and these relationships can take more time to get the contract done because of the power of those high context cultures. Words can also carry different meanings in these high context cultures. There are meanings, they're built into words, where there is direct translation sometimes between different cultures and contexts and languages, but these words may not have the same connotations. And so doing the research to understand, if I'm going into a situation, what are the kinds of words I could say? Get those checked by somebody who's a native in that country. Do your research and build that knowledge base. It's also important to understand how people process information. Deductive reasoning is something that's very common in countries like France, Russia, Germany, where it's principles first. You want to show people the why of an argument. Start with the data, get to the methodology, and go to the arguments and build that story for those people. Whereas with inductive reasoning, which is most common for the United States, it's the way a lot of American business is done. You cut to the chase. You get to the point. People want to know right up front what you're talking about, and then you back it up with the data, methodology, and arguments. Understanding that while not everybody fits perfectly on the two polarized ends, but it's a continuum, and different countries can fit different places in the continuum, basically it just comes down to do your research, understand. As you seek to understand, as is the common theme throughout all of our speeches, that is going to be the most power for you.
So we all know that nonverbal communication is a very important aspect of communicating. But there are two main aspects that I want to highlight for cross-cultural communication, and those are eye contact and physical contact. So in the US, for example, maintaining eye contact with your audience can be perceived as being confident and being bold, which are good things. And while you're listening, maintaining eye contact shows that you're interested in what the other person is saying. And the lack of eye contact shows the exact opposite. In Saudi Arabia, for example, when in a negotiation, maintaining long eye contact can show that you're telling the truth. But at the same time, if you maintain eye contact with someone from an opposite sex for too long, it can be considered offensive. So understand your audience and make sure you know their traditions. Physical contact, on the other hand, is also very important. We have Asian cultures, Germany, and even the US. There are more low contact cultures. So give them their personal space. While Latin America, Italy and Greece are more high contact culture. So for example, in Latin America, it's very normal for people to greet with a hug.
Good.
This same thing could create an awkward situation in the US, for example. So I'm from Brazil, and in Brazil it's very common for women to greet other women and men with a kiss in the cheek. If you're traveling to Brazil, for example, and you don't feel comfortable with that, that's fine. Just extend your hand at first and greet them with a handshake. That won't be considered impolite, but be aware that that could create an awkward situation, and you can avoid that. So the world is getting smaller, and we need to communicate in order to take advantage of all these amazing opportunities and people that are out there. So we want to be prepared, know the other culture's aspects, know a little bit about how they like to do business, learn their language, at least a few words, learn their culture, learn how they want arguments to be presented to them. Do they want to be led to the conclusion, or do they want the conclusion first? But most important, don't be afraid to communicate. Don't let the fear of communicating paralyzes you. Go out there and communicate.